All right, everybody. Week 3 of our optional learning. I really appreciate you sticking with me for 3 weeks. I promise you it's all going to continue to build and build and build and grow. It's going to be layered. This isn't going to be stuff taught in silos. Hopefully you'll be able to make those connections. Maybe you'll even go and you'll bookmark all of these videos and watch them all back to back to back so it all makes sense. And lucky for you, I'm wearing the same clothes, so it'll just seem like one big video. So just recapping, if this is your first time checking this out, go back and watch the first 2. This is week 3. They do build. You can watch this and make some sense out of it, but it'll make even more sense by going back to the very beginning. Okay? Just a recap for those of us that have been now charting along for 3 weeks. The first week, we talked about mean, median, and mode, and averaging of grades, and how that doesn't necessarily show the whole story because it just takes the average of the beginning and the end and discounts all the feedback, all the progress, all the growth, and just says we're just going to take something kind of sort of in the middle. It doesn't tell the story. Last week, we talked about the pattern of behaviors and how it's important to not just recognize which one is most frequent or which one is most often, but also which one is the most consistent, because that matters with feedback. Feedback and grading is just the tipping off point. We're not saying we're changing all of our grading just to change grading. We're saying we need to focus on feedback so that the feedback that we're providing is consistent and it's standardized, and we can have common outcomes from class to class, grade to grade, school to school, so that our students can leave with consistent expectations in learning. So that's a quick recap. Saved you 26 minutes if you're just joining us, but if you want a little bit more behind it, go back and watch. So week 3, we're going to take this to the next level. So if you remember the example that I provided last week when I had all those circles, the 12 circles, and we looked at them and looked at the patterns and said, would we give this person a 3 or 4, an effective, a highly effective, if this were evaluation, would it be an A or B? However, we chose to reflect that in our own thinking of got it, don't got it. All of that is all well and good if we assume that a student has multiple attempts to prove mastery of the same thing, the same topic, the same standard, the same target, whatever you want to call it. So when we go back to those 12 circles, if each of those 12 circles measures something different, it doesn't make any sense to average them because it's averaging different things, like taking apples and oranges and grapes and bananas and trying to find an average of things that are completely different. You can't do it. You can only find averages and themes amongst things that are similar. So it's important that we recognize that those 12 circles that we had all represent the same learning target, the same expectation. So like if it was a big overall teacher evaluation, even the big overall evaluation with the 22 indicators wouldn't work for something like that. Taking one isolated indicator and saying, every time I look in your classroom at indicator 3A on the Danielson framework, is represented by one of those circles. So each of those circles represents one little indicator, then we can do it because that shows growth. But measuring indicator 3A and 2B and 1C and trying to find some sort of average amongst different things makes no sense. But oftentimes that's what we do with our grade books in our classrooms. We teach different skills, different units, different chapters, different content, completely different things, and we lump it all together and we say, we're supposed to make some sort of meaning or sense out of this so that we can then make instructional decisions as to who's got it, who doesn't got it, whether or not we should move on, intervene, or not. It's important that we break things down. One of the key components to breaking things down is getting rid of arbitrary deadlines. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. Arbitrary is going to be the key word. I am not saying we're getting rid of all deadlines. Deadlines are important. We all know we have to have deadlines in life. We have to get things done by certain times and certain dates. I get it. What we're talking about is getting rid of arbitrary deadlines. And I'm going to be honest. This is an issue that we have here in Brandon, and it's not your fault. This is something that I'm working really hard to try to correct from my end, from my office. A lot of times, arbitrary deadlines come into play when we look at pacing guides, or what we call our curriculum, or the script, if you will. We have this expectation that we have so much that we have to cover in 180 days that we have to chunk it out, and we have to come up with anticipated deadlines for when students should or should not know things. I get that. That kind of makes sense. 180 days, 60-some standards. Let's break it down. A standard every 3 days. In theory, yeah, that kind of makes sense. The problem is that assumption assumes, well, that theory assumes that every single kid is coming to us at the same starting point, that they all are going to learn things at the same rate at the same time. Well, here's the deal. All of my kids were born at age 0. None of my kids, I've got 4 kids, none of my kids learned to walk at the exact same time. One learned how to walk when he was 10 months old, one at 11, one at 14 months, one at 9 months. They all learned how to walk at different times. They all started at the same place, but because of different experiences and different opportunities, different mindsets, they learned how to walk at different times. They all learned how to talk at different times. They all learned different words at different times. They learned how to ride their bikes at different times. They learned how to tie their shoes at different times. We all learn things at different times. Similarly, I learned a bunch of statistics 10, 12 years ago that I'm explaining to some of you now. Some of you are going to get this stuff like this. Some of you, it's going to take a little while to register and process, and that's totally fine. We all learn things at our own rates. The problem with pacing and scripted pacing guides is it assumes that kids all learn things at the same time for no reason whatsoever. What we have to do is we have to come up with what we consider reasonable deadlines. Some arbitrary deadlines that we have that we can get rid of. Testing and giving quizzes on Fridays. Why is it that we assume a kid has to learn content Monday through Thursday and then has to get it by Friday? Why is Friday consistently test, quiz, assessment day? What if they get it on Monday? What if they get it on Tuesday? What if they get it 3 weeks from now and it finally registers? Should they be able to demonstrate mastery of it? What about you? As a teacher, I continue to say what we do, they do. Think about observations and evaluations again. The assumption would be that as soon as you get it, you're going to get credit for getting it. As soon as you master it, get that highly effective, that 4 whatever, you're going to get credit for it. But what if it takes you a little bit longer to get the feedback and to grow into it? That's okay. It's our responsibility to measure that and to make those adjustments. What I am working hard to do is get rid of the scripted deadlines that says we have to cover this for 6 weeks, we need to cover that for 3 weeks. And instead say our deadlines are deadlines relating to terms, whether it's a semester or a full year. The standards that are given to our kids by the state of Michigan are year-long standards. Here in Brandon, we've split up some classes by semesters just to make it easier for scheduling. But according to the state of Michigan, students have an entire year to learn content. Just because we teach something in September doesn't mean kids have to learn it in September. According to the state of Michigan, they have until that big assessment, whether it's the SAT, the PSAT, the M-STEP, which is given way out in the spring, March and April, May, June, July, August, if they decide to retake the SAT. They've got that much time to learn it. Just because we present it early on doesn't mean kids have to learn it at that time. Somehow, though, we have to manage whether or not kids are getting it or not getting it, and whether or not we need to continue to give them credit, not credit, continue to give them opportunities to learn and grow, or when do we just move on? So, there are a couple things I want to introduce to you. One is the tic-tac-toe board, and the second is the power of 80. So let's focus on the tic-tac-toe board. So if you remember last time when we were looking at those circles, those dots, and we looked at the consistency of patterns, one of the things that I focus in on is the power of 3. My grade book in my classroom does not look like a lot of grade books in a lot of classrooms. First of all, I think it's important, going back to that reliability idea that we talked about last time. I always grade on a 4-point rubric. We'll talk more about that later on. It helps us show the process of learning, helps with inter-rater reliability, as opposed to A minus, B minus, B, C plus, all that stuff. I do a 4-point rubric. I also look for the power of 3. So let's just, a hypothetical, if you will. My grade book would actually be 30 pages long if I had 30 students. It'd be 90 pages long if I had 90 students. 180 pages long if I had 180 students. But I'll show you some simple ways. This is just for example. Each of my students would have a grid similar to this. On this grid would be some simple things. Above each of these little boxes, I would have dates. Next to each of these boxes, I would have a standard. In my class, I had somewhere between 10 and 15 essential standards for kids to master. 10 to 15. There might be 65 that the state said I could teach, that they might be assessed on, but there'd be 10 or 15 that I decided, along with my peers, were the essentials. We'll talk more about this in a future week. The most powerful, the most important, the come hell or high water, my kids are going to learn these standards. And those would be the 10 that I would have on the page. So I might have standard 1, standard 2, standard 3, and let's say that this is the grade book for Davey. Davey is this great kid I have in my class. He's super nice, super polite, super advantageous and eager to learn. Davey is a good student. Well, let's say on the first week of school, Davey is given some tasks, some projects, some sort of assessment where I'm trying to assess whether or not he has mastery of standard 1 and standard 2. It's some sort of task that's combining standards. I want to see if he can apply some of his knowledge, maybe evaluate some sources. He's doing something. And on standard 1, he gets a 3. Standard 2, he gets a 2. Remember, it's a 4-point rubric. And let's say that this took place on September 1st. The following week, he has another assignment, another task. Well, let's say that on this task, it's going to say 9-8. He's assessed on standard 2 and standard 3. This time he gets another 2. On standard 3, he gets a 4. It's awesome. So on and so forth. So I've got all of these different dates. Maybe the dates are back-to-back days, whatever. What I'm looking for on my tic-tac-toe board of assessment is I'm looking for 3 in a row. Anytime a student demonstrates success or the lack thereof 3 times in a row, I'm looking at that and saying that's an indicator pattern. That shows that that is a consistent and reliable score of evidence for that student. If it's a 3 or a 4, and I see 3 4s in a row, boom, that kid's got it. I'm not going to assess that kid on that standard again, because they've proven to me they've mastered this at a very high level. If it's a student who 3 times in a row is getting a 1 or a 2, guess what? I'm not going to continue to teach that kid the same way I'm teaching everybody else. That's a kid that's showing continued struggles on a standard, and they're going to get an intervention, some sort of differentiated strategy, because again, consistency in patterns. If I'm seeing 3s and 2s and 4s and inconsistencies, this might be a kid that I pull small group with, or I have some individual conversations with, because it might just be the modalities or the methods I'm assessing him. Maybe I'm giving him a lot of paper pencil, and he's really more auditory. Maybe he scores better on assignments where he's allowed to be creative and have projects, but he scores lower on things that involve writing, and those things confound the results. So I might try to figure out a different method to assess him. So again, this is just by example. If you are a high school teacher and you have 150 kids, you might not have 150 different grids. I wouldn't do that. What I might do is I might just have a grid that has 3 or 4 standards on it, and I might have 3 or 4 different kids' names on here. How do you assess all this? Does this mean you're bringing home papers every single week and every single day? Not necessarily. A lot of this assessment can get done while the kids are working. You don't always have to wait for the finished product. Kids are working, they're demonstrating some quality evidence, you have a conversation with them, you got your little clipboard out, your iPad out, your laptop, however it is that you're keeping track of all this, and you're just scoring it in the moment. Eliminating the need to take the briefcase home and the bag home. You can give them feedback, 1, 2, 3, 4, based off of your rubric and your standards, and you're looking for those tic-tac-toe patterns. Pretty simple. It's a pretty great way to do it. It's the grid method, the tic-tac-toe method, looking for those 3 in a row. So again, this is important though if we have the expectation that these standards last an entire year or an entire term. That it could take a kid up until sometime in the future to eventually demonstrate mastery. Now instructionally, this requires some other thinking, some other thoughts as well, because the whole group instruction where we're going to have everybody sitting in front of us learning the same stuff might not necessarily apply anymore, especially if you have kids that are showing mastery very early on. Or you have some kids that are showing struggles very early on. At the elementary level, I know they do this a lot of times with skill groups. They'll pull certain kids over to the kidney table or the carpet. Middle school and high school, same sorts of things can happen with intervention groups, support groups, advanced groups, accelerated groups. You can put kids into pockets based off of their skills, based off of their modalities. Maybe you got some kids that just need to work on projects because you're seeing interesting patterns amongst like oral or written or visual, AV, whatever the case may be. This helps you differentiate both based off of their academic ability as well as their skills and what you know about them as people. Again, the grid, the tic-tac-toe board, something I can help you with, but again, it's required. The requirement for this is that we shrink our scale, not from 0 to 100 anymore, or even letter grades, which letter grades might be a stepping point for you if you're not comfortable doing rubrics, looking for those consistent patterns. Letter grades could work, and also eliminating those arbitrary deadlines. Are there still gonna be some deadlines? Sure. Maybe you know you only can give the month of September to cover standard 1 because you just don't have the time in your schedule to continue to go through this. This is a foundational skill. Okay, that makes sense. But saying a kid has to learn it by Friday, that's arbitrary. It's something that we just threw out there to say, that makes sense, even though it might not. Realistic deadlines to support quality learning, go for it. Deadlines because of marking periods and semesters, got it. Arbitrary deadlines, something we gotta talk about.